Hello everyone, welcome to another Monday movie. I'm Mr. Blue Summers. So this week's topic is how to address your lighting situation with regards to the time it takes to render. The image that you see on your screen right now is 800 pixels wide, about 300 pixels high, 250, 300 pixels high. And I rendered it using Final Gather, at low precision with one bounce, lots of soft lighting, lots of accurate color shading. It's really elegant. But it took almost 2 minutes to render. It took a minute 40 seconds, which is absolutely lethal if you're using this in an animation. If it takes you 2 minutes for every single frame and you've got 30 frames per second and you're trying to render a 30-second animation for a client, it's going to take you like 3 days. It's going to take you a long, long time. So what do? Well, you have two options. You can either totally decimate your lighting solution accuracy, turn the bounces down to 0, Final Gather precision down to as far as it'll go, and maybe you'll get your render time down to 30 seconds, which is still abysmal. Even at 30 seconds, it's going to take you 12 hours to render that animation. You're going to have to leave it overnight to render. But if you lit the scene yourself, if you didn't use Final Gather, if you didn't use any kind of pre-computed lighting setup, you could get that render in 3 seconds. And you could have that animation by the time you got back from your lunch break. So I don't have time to sort of walk you through the relighting of this scene. It's just too complicated. I might do a written tutorial on it later. But I do want to show you some of the techniques that I used both for this scene and for the manually lit one. And then I kind of want to sort of draw a line between the two systems so that you know when to use one and when to use the other. So as per the last Monday movie, I used the Mental Ray Sun and Sky system. I used light portals for each one of those windows. You can see right here. Lots of light coming in. Turn the exposure up so it's nice and bright. And then in the background here, I put in 2 area lights that are casting a little bit of light, and that's kind of fun. It's, for kicks. I love these little tests. They're a lot of fun. And you can see that, the colors blend really nicely. The shadows make a lot of sense, but it takes too long to render. So let's take a look at the manually lit scene, and we'll draw some contrasts. I'm going to go ahead and render this. Okay. So this render took 3 seconds. It took just 3 seconds. And there are some significant differences between this render and the previous one in terms of the lighting setup. The fact is that it is incredibly hard to totally nail that Final Gather solution at the end of the render. But we've come close. Light is coming in through the window, strikes the floor and the wall, creates sort of an ambient light in that area. It gradually comes out toward the other parts of the room. And it comes as close as you'd want to get for a quick render. Now, of course, if your client is like Nike and they absolutely have to have it perfect, well then yes, go ahead and give them the beefy lighting solution. But if it's a potential client, you don't even know if they have the money in the bank, you'll want to use this method rather than kind of going all out. So let's look at some of the techniques I used here and how you can apply them to your scene. So each one of these windows, instead of a Mental Ray Sky portal, we use something similar, which is an ambient-only OmniLight. When I set it to ambient only, these lights will not create bumps. They won't cast any shadows, so they won't bring out bumps on your materials. They also won't create specular highlights. So they just give that sort of soft, indirect lighting feel. And you need a zillion of them because they don't bounce around. So you have to fake the bounces yourself. That's why you see all these omnis here. Let's kind of peruse the scene a little. So each one of these You notice that I've stretched them so that they reach into the room much farther than they ordinarily would. This one's a little bit big. So they reach into the room and they bring light into the room. In fact, let's take a look at just these three, and you can see what the ambient looks like. I'm going to run a quick thing here. For I in selection, do I dot bold equals false. There we go. So I'm going to turn these guys back on. And now I'm going to re-render, and let's take a look at just what the Omni does. So this Omni light just kind of brings in the beginnings of the outside light. In fact, these should probably be just a little bit brighter and bluer. Yeah. So they bring in that diffuse light from the sky. And then when you're doing a manual lighting solution, you then have to ask yourself, well, what's the next component? What's the next piece? Well, sunlight. Okay. Sunlight. Very fast. So then you ask yourself, all right, what's the next piece? How about the light that's coming in through the windows that is the sun, and it strikes the wall and floor, then what? Well, it bounces off. So then you need more Omni lights that simulate that bouncing. That might be, I believe is it this one? Yeah. So I'll turn this guy on. 1, 2, 3 windows. Light coming in, striking the floor and the bench. And so now you can see that change as well. So this is a much more tactile way of illuminating your scene. You really have control in this situation. You know exactly where the light is going to be, exactly where it's going to go. It tends to yield a darker solution overall because there are small pockets that don't get illumination. But in general, this will be a faster system. I'm also using I'm not using a lot of shadow casting, so that helps the render time as well. There's not a whole lot in here to cast shadows with. In fact, because this room is so well illuminated, I did use a little trick. And I bet if you look really closely down here in this corner, you can guess what that trick is. Yeah, that's right. I used ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is such a great tool, and I feel kind of sorry for it because it came into the game just at the same time as Final Gather was becoming fast enough to be used all the time. So it never became part of the learning process in manually lighting up a scene when it really has so much to contribute. So I recommend using ambient occlusion whenever possible, unless you're using Final Gather, because ambient occlusion will just slow down your Final Gather calculation. But when you're doing a manual lighting setup where you say, I really don't need the extra bounces, I don't need the computer to calculate the lighting for me, go ahead, use ambient occlusion. You're going to love it. It's going to go fast. And it's going to give you that soft shadowing that you're looking for. So, I guess, to wrap up, I implore you to consider when you're lighting a scene whether you should be using a manually set up lighting solution or a Final Gather lighting solution. The difference is the render time. The render time of Final Gather and GI and depth of field and all those other great features can be prohibitive. So until next week, feel free to play around with this. I highly recommend that you try lighting a scene yourself and see how close you can get to that Final Gather solution. It's a lot of fun. So, next Monday, I'll see you then. Check back for another Monday movie. Take care.